obviously there's one thing that would make this all very worthwhile, and that is to find a signal that's actually due to extraterrestrials. The SETI Institute is interested in life beyond Earth, right? We haven't found any of any kind, not even bacteria. We haven't found any life beyond Earth, but I feel it's almost a certainty that we will find some evidence for life, extraterrestrial life, sometime in the next decade or so, right? And it may be that we just find fossilized microbes on Mars, right? But, Mars is one place to look. We're looking. The clouds of Venus are another place to look. There are 3 moons of Jupiter. There are 2 moons of Saturn. All of these places have liquids, either on the surface or underneath the surface. And if you have liquids and 4.5 billion years to cook up something, the chances that you've cooked up something aren't all that, unlikely. So I think we'll find life, unless biology is somehow extremely rare. We will find life very soon. But intelligent life, well, that might take a little bit longer. You could have looked at the Earth for a long time and never found anything intelligent, or more intelligent than a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Now, the idea of SETI had been actually figured out by a couple of physicists who were at Cornell University at the time, And what they did is they asked themselves, suppose you have a big radio transmitter here, and you have a big radio receiver here. Obviously, the receiver can pick up the transmitter if they're aimed at one another. But as you move them apart, the signal gets weaker and weaker. And they just did the very simple calculation. How far apart could you separate the transmitter and the receiver and still pick it up, still pick up the transmitter? And to their surprise, that number turns out to be light years. In other words, there could be radio signals bouncing around the universe all the time, and we don't know, or didn't know, simply because we hadn't looked for them. People may imagine us sitting around with earphones trying to hear something. We don't. If we have earphones on, it's usually because we're tuned into some music station and just trying to, allow us to concentrate on whatever we're really doing. You can't really use earphones for this. Think about it. Our current equipment monitors something like 70 million channels simultaneously. So that's a lot of earphones, and you need a lot of people to be listening. It's not the way it's done. It's done with computers. They do the listening, and we just, pay attention if they find something that they cannot rule out. And that doesn't happen because most of the time, almost all the time, we encounter signals that we've encountered before, and we know it's not ET, that's something humans are doing. Or if it doesn't have the characteristics of a signal that is coming, if you will, from the stars, then we can quickly rule that out too. So all these automatic test schemes that are used, make it sort of like, you're looking for something in a needle in a haystack, if you will, but the machines are going through the hay much more quickly than you could do it manually. At the time that the SETI Institute hired me, and that was about 1990, there was only one project here, and that was SETI, right? We were using antennas, not antennas we had built, but antennas we could use, existing radio telescopes around the world to try and eavesdrop on ET. So it was an established thing, and it was a NASA program. Now I came on and, did my bit, but within 2 years, the NASA program was canceled by the US Congress. Since then, SETI has been, privately funded, but the SETI Institute has broadened its programs to include any research that might find life in space, even microbes on Mars. I think the important thing for people to understand about SETI is, obviously the idea of the experiment. You're going to pick up signals that are either deliberately or not deliberately just aimed in our direction from some other society. But the practical point is that the experiment keeps getting better very quickly because it's very dependent on compute power. So because computers keep getting cheaper and cheaper for any given level of performance, right, the experiment keeps getting more and more extensive, more sensitive, more comprehensive. Traditionally, SETI has used existing antennas, such as the one down in Arecibo, Puerto Rico, but also antennas in Greenbank, West Virginia, in Australia. We've used antennas around the world, really. But, it was always the goal to build our own antenna, so we didn't have to kick anybody else off the antenna to use it. And that is the situation today. We have our own antenna. It's called the Allen Telescope Array. It's in the Cascade Mountains of California. Lovely spot, not too many restaurants, but we can at least use that telescope as often as we want. The NASA SETI experiment began with a study of, what kind of equipment do we need to do an experiment where we're trying to eavesdrop on the aliens? Now, one obvious thing is that you don't know where on the dial to tune, right? You just don't know that. So you have to have receivers that are sensitive over a very wide range of frequencies. And that's not something that's usually the case for astronomy. So that required some special hardware, and they spent time developing that hardware. After that, the idea was to actually get some time on big radio antennas, big radio telescopes, move in this special equipment, hook it up, and then, point at nearby star systems, hoping to pick up a signal that would tell you we're not alone. That's how it began. I'm occasionally asked, so how far away could the aliens be and you could still pick up their signal? And there's no simple answer to that, because it depends entirely on how much money the aliens want to spend on their transmitting project. I mean, if they're limiting themselves to a 10-watt transmitter, we won't hear them from very far away. But if they have a bigger antenna or a more powerful transmitter, you could hear them even if they were on the other side of the galaxy. So it turns out that radio technology is very, very sensitive and very efficient at sending bits of information from one place in space to another. People will ask, okay, so you're trying to pick up signals from ET. Have you heard them? And the answer to that is no. I mean, if the answer were other than no, this wouldn't be such a little-known project, right? But then they will occasionally ask, okay, well, are you getting closer? And of course, we don't know that. I mean, until you hear them, you don't know whether you're close or not. I personally became so, obsessed with this question because it was asked all the time, that I just bet everybody in the audience I'd buy them a cup of coffee if we didn't find the aliens by about 2035. And I stand by that. I'm still willing to buy those cups of coffee as long as not too many people ask for it. The last time we picked up a signal that really got our attention seemed to be 1997. I think that that's correct. And the boss called me up at home. It was dinner time, and he said, get on down here. And there was a signal that we had picked up using an antenna in West Virginia that looked like the real deal. And for most of the day, it seemed like the real deal. Nobody went to sleep, right? I kept waiting for the White House to call. They didn't call. I kept waiting for somebody important to call, or even my mom. She didn't call. Nobody called. But actually, I was half asleep the next morning at 9 a.m. and the phone rang, and it was the New York Times. They did call. The media are on these stories right away. And that was interesting, just to see what would happen. For myself, I found it very nerve-wracking to think that we'd finally found the aliens, because I realized, all the dinners I had set up for the week, or my plans to do this, that, or the other, they're all going to be put on hold. So that was kind of a discomforting thought. We pick up signals all the time in SETI. I mean, I sat there and watched when we were observing down in Puerto Rico using the big Arecibo telescope, now defunct. But typically every 10 seconds you picked up another signal. There's signals all over the place because, there's activity all over the place, mostly radar and satellites, Earth satellites, that are broadcasting information down to the ground. Was any of that classified stuff? Probably some of it might have been, but of course we're not, decoding it. We just know there's a signal, so that, it's like you hear somebody speaking a block away, but you don't know what they're saying because they're too far away and you're not tuned in. So you can't say, gee, maybe I shouldn't have heard that. All you know is that you heard somebody speaking. You shouldn't get the idea that there's something frustrating about the fact that we haven't found anybody so far, right? Because the experiment more or less doubles in speed every 2 years. That's just the improvements in computer technology, right? So that's why the future is bright. That's why, 5 years from now, we'll observe in 1 year, we'll collect as much data as has been collected in all the time since the first SETI experiment in 1960. So this is kind of an optimistic an endeavor that has sort of an optimistic side to it, that don't get discouraged because the experiment's getting faster, it's getting better. I've had numerous jobs, most of them involving my astronomy interests. I've worked at universities in Europe and at observatories in the United States. Mostly I was studying galaxies, but all along I retained that interest I had developed as a kid in aliens and the possibility of aliens. And it just struck me one night when I was, doing observations for my PhD thesis, actually, that, the equipment that's used for astronomy could also be used to find ET. And, that was kind of a revelation. I think that's when I developed a much more serious interest in SETI. My background includes a lot of science and engineering interests, both of which I developed very, very young. I think that was because of my father. He was an electronics engineer, and he had some ham equipment down in the basement of our apartment, which had a basement. And I found that extraordinarily interesting, that you could use this equipment, which had these glowing tubes, and talk to people around the world. I grew up about 3 miles from the Pentagon in Northern Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. And my father was in the Navy Reserves. He became a captain in the Navy Reserves, and all my neighbors, almost all of them, worked for the government, and many of them for the military branches of the government. So it was very normal for me to go to school with kids whose fathers or mothers were working for the FBI, or they were working for the Navy Department or the Army or the Air Force. All of that was just part of my childhood. I assumed that every kid had the same. I mean, my interest in SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, began when I was a grad student. And, it had only been a small number of years since Frank Drake, who's connected with this organization here, since Frank Drake had done the first modern SETI experiment. He used an antenna in West Virginia to see if he could pick up any signals coming from a couple of nearby stars. Now, I found that interesting, but beyond that, not terribly relevant. It was only when I moved to California much, much later that the SETI Institute heard that I was in town, for what that's worth, and they called me up and said, "You want a job here?" And so here I am. People who think that we're making money by doing this, take my job and see how much money you make. Obviously, this is a nonprofit organization, the SETI Institute. People here are not paid very much. We're in the Silicon Valley. Anybody who really cares about money should just walk across the street and get a job with the high-tech firm down there or the startup 2 blocks away, and they can earn a lot more money. We don't do this for the money.
So why do people do this?
People do this experiment because they're curious. This is just curiosity, right? What would be the practical consequences of finding ET? Well, there might not be any. All you know is that, well, in that direction, at a distance of 50 light years, there's something making radio noise that's not natural. Somebody built something. That's what you would know. I mean, this is basic research, if you will, or more accurately, it's exploration, right? We can't falsify the hypothesis here. The hypothesis is there's somebody out there, and there's no way you can prove that there's nobody out there. But what you can do, conceivably, is prove that there actually is someone out there, or something smart enough to, build radio transmitters. And that is such an interesting question that people are interested in studying. I mean, it's like almost all basic research in science. It's being done because the people are curious about something. I would simply say that, the SETI Institute is involved in a long shot experiment, at least as far as its SETI work goes. Have we picked up a signal from the aliens? I mean, somebody has been listening off and on. There have been experiments for the last 60 years, right? And we haven't heard anything yet. Does that mean anything? And the answer is no, it doesn't mean anything, because we haven't looked at enough star systems to even be able to say, well, there's a 1 in a million chance that there's actually something out there. I mean, we just don't know. So we had to continue the experiment. And you can say, yeah, but you guys, you're spending money, you're building equipment, right? You got programmers working on software and so on, and you still haven't found anything. Maybe we shouldn't spend the money. Well, it's not government money, it's donated money. So it's not your money, if you like it that way. On the other hand, if it does succeed, that would be a turning point for human history. Suddenly we would know our place in the universe much better than we do now.